Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we have another user submission from a man named Jesse. He actually submitted this story in 2012. So let me just use this as an example to reaffirm that we are going to be making an effort to cover every submission that we've ever gotten into a podcast. Old or new, and we're randomly just going to take them. So again, that's incentive for you guys to get your story in here if you would like us to put it in a show. Also, on that note, if you have a paranormal story or an effed up story, or pictures or video or anything like that in that realm of the paranormal, we'd like to have it. And you can submit that to us at our official website, which is at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, click submissions, fill out the form, submit. We'll have it. And also, some topics that I'm hoping to cover in the near future. I'm going to throw it out there for you guys so that if you have a story on this particular topic, I could get it out there really, really quickly. So two of these things. One is phantom phone calls. We've all kind of experienced something at some point in our lives where we've gotten phone calls with nobody on the other end, or maybe you've gotten a call from a relative that had just died and you didn't know it yet. These are all very common, of course, in the realm of phantom phone calls. But there's all kinds of crazy stories. So if you have a story on that, I'd like to have it. Another one that I'd like to have is on near-death experiences. If any of you guys out there have had a near-death experience, I'd like very, very much would be interested in hearing from you. And again, if you guys can get this into me soon enough, it's very likely to get into the next podcast that we do that covers said topic. So with that having been said, let us jump to the story for the evening. So again, as I said, this story came in from a man named Jesse, 2012. And is actually not, like, he submitted it, but the story is a passed down story in his family. It took place roughly 7 years before he was born, which would make this story, I believe he said it was 1983 or 1984 that it took place. So as the story goes, his family went to stay with some close friends in southern England. This house was a rather large house, and it was, it was basically two apartments. They had, changed it from one house into two apartments. And the family that went to stay there was Jesse's mom, his grandparents, and his two uncles. And they had they went to stay into the empty apartment that was on their friend's house. Now, the reason why the apartment was vacant, It wasn't as just blasé as there just happened to be nobody staying there. It was because the past tenants had a unusual experience there. So as you know, this is kind of part luck and part misfortune, I guess, depending on your view of it. It was vacant because, as you know, the stuff that happened to these, it was an elderly couple that were there, and they experienced the usual ghostly rattles, things moving, the ominous feeling. You could almost check these off of a paranormal checklist. But the family that was staying there was lucky because they got their own apartment for the trip. So it was unlucky to be staying in a haunted apartment, but it was lucky that they had their own space. It kind of reminds me of that little skit from The Simpsons with the monkey paw. It's good news. It'll give you 3 wishes. That's good, but it's cursed. That's bad. But it comes with free Frogurt. That's good, and it's cursed. Also, that's bad. So anyway, Jesse's grandparents just thought that the previous tenants were batshit crazy. They didn't really believe the story that it was haunted or whatever, because as we all know, this is the general consensus of normal society until it's them that experiences the paranormal. So the family all settles in, and right out of the gate, they start to experience that very common feeling of being watched constantly. And they would get up in the morning and they would find chairs and furniture that would be all tipped over and in weird positions. The spare rooms, though vacant, nobody was actually staying in these spare rooms. They would still be messed up, as if somebody had lived in them all week. Stuff would be thrown all over the place. Mattresses would be on the floor. But like normal logical folk, like Jesse's grandparents, they just chalked this up to being a practical joke that they believe was being carried out by their friends next door. So the grandmother confronted the owners the next day, and she was surprised, if not a little disturbed, because they gave her a very honest answer, and it's not really what she expected to hear. So they ended up taking a tour of the house, and they were given a little bit of history on what had transpired there. On the top floor, there was a door at the end of the hallway, and beyond this door was a room where a man had apparently committed suicide. Apparently, he was grief-stricken by the fact that his wife and 2 kids were killed during the Blitz in Plymouth. So in any case, the grandfather, rather irritated at the stuff that he had experienced there. First he tried to open the door and found that it completely resisted him. So he, got more tense and more strong trying to open this thing until he went into a fury. He tried to kick the door in, but of course to no avail. This thing just wasn't going to budge. And that is what makes the next night so strange, is that the following night, the grandparents, they distinctly said that they remembered hearing the door opening and closing ad nauseum. And of course, when they went to investigate it, it was closed, jammed shut, just as before. On that same night, Jesse's mom, like I said, it was his mom, his 2 uncles, and her parents, and that was Jesse's grandparents. Anyway, his mom had awoken from her sleep, and went to the bathroom. And as she was washing her hands, she looked up into the mirror and, of course, saw 2 transparent people staring back at her from behind. And she described it, she thought it appeared to be a father and a daughter. But anyway, it scared the shit out of her, and she ran to her parents' room, woke them up, and they didn't believe her story, right? I mean, despite all this stuff, they're just, they're not buying into this at all. So fast forward to the next night, and the 2 uncles, aged 8 and 10 at the time, they were sharing a bedroom in the place. And like all kids, they were jumping on the beds, to play. They were ransacking the place and making a big mess. And this bedroom, very luxurious, I might add, just happened to have a fireplace. And as the kids were hopping around on the beds making a racket, a log suddenly rolls out of the fireplace and onto the hardwood floor. So, the kids scream to their grandmother, hysterical at the idea that this place is going to go up in flames. And so the grandmother's racing to get there, and when she finally does, she looks at the log on the floor, and it oozes out a thick red liquid, which, by the way, put out the fire that was on the log in the first place. And naturally, when I read this, it sounded like blood. I'm sure that's what you guys are thinking as well. And this concept was not lost on the grandparents, because they took a sample of the liquid to a doctor the next morning to be tested. And she was told that, she would have to wait a week to hear back from the pathologist. So that following night, the grandfather gets a terrible migraine and went to bed early. And the grandmother, she agreed to watch the kids so the grandfather could go to bed. And about a half hour later, the grandmother heard what she described as frantic movement and banging coming from the room that the grandfather was staying in. So, and this is just such a nightly events, it seems, for this poor couple. So she races up to the bedroom, and she finds him on the floor, and he's gasping for air. And she's freaking out. She doesn't really know what's happening, and she's screaming at him, what's wrong? Is there some way that you can possibly convey what's happening to you? And, he manages to choke out a few words saying, something to the effect that something's choking him. He's motioning that, there's hands around his neck. And as he's doing this, the grandmother notices these marks that appear around his neck, and she can see the blood kind of coming to the surface of the skin around this area. And at some point, Jesse doesn't really elaborate into this, but at some point the choking stops, and the grandfather is telling the story to his wife, and he says, he felt these two hands around his neck, but he couldn't see who was doing it. He doesn't know how he got in that position. It's just he found himself there like that. And this was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The grandparents rounded up their kids, all their possessions, told their friends that they were going back home to London. And a week after they arrived home, of course, the results from this sample taken from the fire log had come back. And it was concluded that it was indeed human blood. Jesse said that his grandfather, still to this day, has the letter confirming the analysis, and that Jesse himself has seen it on multiple occasions. Now, one last event to put the cherry on top, the grandmother said that the house actually burned down in 1993, and the firemen who went to fight the fire reported seeing the figure of a person silently burned to death in the blaze. And after they put the fire out, they went into search, trying to find the remains, and they couldn't find anything. So, that's a bit of an effed up story, if I do say so myself.
Most definitely. All the spiritual stuff aside, the fact that you have this log that comes bouncing out of the fire out onto the floor of we're assuming is a wooden or carpeted floor, and then suddenly starts oozing blood, enough fluid, in fact, that it puts the fire out on the log. And then to get the confirmation from a medical laboratory that, yes, indeed, it's human blood. Now, that's a truly bizarre twist on a relatively, classic ghost story, as it were. Right down to the figure, burning in the fire, the transparent figures in the mirror. Those are some very classic apparition, spirit, ghost haunting elements. But now to have this confirmation that yes, indeed, we have human blood bubbling out of a log. Now that's truly bizarre. I can honestly say I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, that's the kind of the detail that sticks out to me as well, because actually there's two elements to the story that sticks out to me. I mean, we always hear stories of furniture being turned around, or maybe your wallet or personal possessions are moved, and you find it in odd places. You hear sounds. All of that stuff, like I said earlier, you could almost check off of a paranormal checklist. A paranormal investigator comes to your door. He has this checklist. It's like, have you heard voices? Have things gone disappearing? Have this happened? These are all so common that they could be on this list, except when it comes to physical, we have the physical evidence, as in the case with the blood, and we have physical interaction when it comes to the grandfather being choked. Now, I have heard of people being physically attacked, mainly though with demon activity. And of course, you do have poltergeist, but with poltergeist, it's usually objects being thrown, right? Like, I mean, we've all heard the stories where people get slapped or they get hit. But I find that is more in line to do with demonic activity. And in fact, even the blood aspect of it, again, is something that's more akin to, a demonic episode somewhere. And usually the blood is used as a, I think more than anything else, as a fear motivator, right? Because it's something that speaks to us as humans. It's just like skeletons. It's never, it's never like an animal skeleton.
Oh, when we're talking about, obviously what we're talking about here is some kind of manifestation. If we're going to put it into words and terms here, and we're going to assume that for a spirit to manifest itself, even physically, to become an apparition is one thing. So when the grandmother sees the reflections of the two figures in the mirror, now that's one thing. The pull together enough energy to allow yourself to be seen visibly. Then to go through the process of moving furniture or flipping furniture around, that's a considerable step up. And then to go from, moving furniture around to a full on physical assault on somebody, again, that's another clear escalation. And, but we come back to this bleeding log, when you end up with a substance, and I guess in a lot of instances where we're talking about spirits manifesting some kind of fluid, it's generally referred to as ectoplasm.
Yes.
But I can honestly say I've never heard of ectoplasm testing positive to being, human blood. That's truly bizarre. If there's a spirit that's powerful enough to manifest a fluid, I mean, I can somehow get there on that. But to be powerful enough to manifest, something that shows up as human hemoglobin, I mean, that's in a league of its own, I think, when it comes to spirits. That's some pretty, some pretty potent spirit power going on there.
Well, see, if I try to look at it in a more rational, angle of view, because I mean it's a big jump, right? It's a big jump to. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just that part of the story is such a big step up from the common stories that we hear that it's the hardest part to get your head around. And I think, like, is it possible that for some reason that this log could have had human blood in it before this all happened? Was there some scenario where human blood could have been put into it for some reason? I can only conjecture, offer conjecture on why that is. Maybe a ritual. Maybe somebody was, killed with a block of wood and somehow absorbed all this blood. Even if you could conceive of a rational explanation for why it could be in there, I can't come up with a reason why it would all leak out and put out the fire, right? Like,
Yeah, well, there's even if somebody had, killed somebody and chopped them up and stuffed a body part in a hole in a tree, all the normal processes of blood would end up with it being congealed, and it's not like you can just heat up blood and it will go all runny again, kind of a thing. It's going to more bake in a fire, I would imagine. And then, like you said, for there to be enough that it would put out, even if there wasn't the log in question wasn't, completely ablaze, we're still talking about a considerable amount of fluid, especially in the terms of human blood, to put out a fire. I mean, you need more than a few drops.
oh hell yeah. And so this is the part, the hump in the story that is gonna either people are gonna jump on board or they're gonna jump off, right? Like this is the defining moment of where how much they're gonna buy this and buy the whole story or not at all, just based on this one event. I think for a lot of people,
Sure.
and the interesting thing about the blood, just simply based on the idea that I mean, we see it in Hollywood all the time. I mean, you got a ghost story. How many horror movies have we seen now with the walls bleed in the house, or as in The Shining, like a tidal wave of blood gets off the elevator, right? Hollywood and movies in general, even indie films, we use blood as a medium to convey that horror, and not just movies. I mean, video games, books.
Well, it's definitely something that is in popular media or in the mind of the public. But I think one of the most notable examples, at least historically in the real life, would have to be the occurrences of statuary, bas reliefs and paintings crying blood.
Yes.
And of course, there's also been reports of images of Christ bleeding from the hands and feet, as if
Actually, that's a good point. Stigmata is something that stigmata
is more in another person.
It is, but it's an example of blood, I guess, manifesting with no injury, or reason that we can find in logic. But that's the best example that I can think of. But there was it the statue of Mary also?
Yeah, well, there's been several statues of saints, sometimes just statues of angels, statues of Jesus, and paintings of holy figures as well. And there's been many, many stories, relating to different kinds of religious iconography, especially figures of people having blood coming from their eyes as if they're crying blood.
What do you suppose that is?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess on one hand, I guess it's one of three things. It is either exactly what it looks like. It's the manifestation of a holy sign upon holy imagery. It's some sort of extreme form of strange tulpa or thought form, where enough people have enough belief in this one thing that they cause a physical event to manifest, or it's all hoaxes. I mean, that's that's really all I can ascribe to it.
Well, I find it, like you mentioned, this often happens with religious artifacts. You don't often hear it in like a ghost story outside of Hollywood, but there is something about the blood is very a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very powerful symbolic item.
Oh, definitely. I mean, blood traditionally was, the fluid that conveyed life. It was the very medium in which the human spirit, human life. You think how powerful that is. As you can cut somebody on their wrist and just stand there and literally watch the life drain out of them, drop by drop by drop.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Like it does symbolize life, but depending on your view and what you're seeing, it can also convey death because it's like the glass is half full, it's half empty kind of a thing. You look at the blood and its life is like symbolic of life, and of course the draining of the blood is symbolic of death, right? So,
and I guess another possibility exists for any of you who have listened to our previous episodes, especially the one on fairies. Perhaps this is one of their special little fairy statues that they would carve and fool people into thinking that they were people.
Oh, the stocks.
The stocks. There you go. I forgot the name of them there.
Yeah, that would actually be an interesting turn of events if that's what it turned out to be. But of course, if we were trying to tie it all together, what are we looking at? We got a ghost of what appears to be a father and a daughter, and we have some paranormal activity,
poltergeist-like activity,
poltergeist-like activity, and then we have what appears to be a figure of somebody burned to death in the fire, which we can assume to be the ghost that was left behind. So maybe that was the father. Maybe the father. I'm just saying this because I watched a movie like it. Maybe the father raped the daughter, and he had to live in the house of his sin for all eternity. That's and the blood symbolized breaking the hymen.
Oh, Jesus. That's a very specific and very literal interpretation of things, but
it was pretty literal in the movie too. I'm actually thinking of what was it called? An American Haunting, I think it was.
Yes, of course.
Wasn't a great movie, but I saw it the other night. So while in Rome, right?
Yeah.
But so we really don't know what it is. But there you have it for you guys out there. Believe it or not. Interesting to hear nonetheless, I hope. If you do have an effed up story of your own, though, we would like to hear it and get it out in its own podcast. You can get that to us at the official site, effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And again, two topics that I'm very interested in hearing stories for, if you have it, is near-death experiences and phantom phone calls. Not just, don't send me one that's just like my phone rang a couple times and there's no one there. That's been happening to me the whole last month or two at work. But if you got something more substantial than that, maybe you picked up the phone and, it was your grandma, and then you found out the next day that she was dead when she called you, or, you're picking up the phone and you're hearing static and screams and you trace the number and you find out it doesn't even exist. It doesn't belong to anybody. And, of course, better than that, though. So if you got stories like that, I'd like to hear it. And, of course, that's a topic I'm hoping to cover soon, so it'll get out pretty soon. And with that having been said, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll catch us next time.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great night.